All right, so we are currently live.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Antonio Downing, and I'm the first Vice President of the Anne Arundel County branch of the NAACP. I would like to welcome each of you that have tuned in via Zoom and Facebook Live to participate in tonight's webinar, which is entitled Voter Education. Tonight's webinar is going to be very informative, a lot of information that will prepare you for the 2020 election. I would like to thank our distinguished guests and panel members that will be joining us this evening. So sit back and be informed, and we'll talk with you in a second. Over to you, Rhonda.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining our important voter education webinar. The collective group is hosting tonight's event, and the collective group is comprised of a group of very hardworking, diligent civic action organizations, and they are the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, Anne Arundel County Chapter, the North Arundel County Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, the Arundel Bay Area Chapter of Jack and Jill of America Incorporated, Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated, the RHOETAZETA Chapter, the Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated, the Anne Arundel County Sigma Gamma Rho Chapter, and the Anne Arundel County branch of the NAACP. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. Good evening, everyone. My name is Monique Brown, and I am the Assistant Secretary for the Anne Arundel County branch of the NAACP. I would like to say thank you to everyone that is participating this evening, and I would also like to thank our panelists that are joining us today. We all know that there's been several changes in the voting process, and many have unanswered questions about what voting will look like in November. So we really appreciate the panelists taking the time out to educate our audience about the upcoming elections. So before we begin, I just wanted to briefly describe how our town hall will proceed this evening. For most of the town hall, all of the participants will be muted with the exception of those people who are co-hosting, and they were identified beforehand. And many of you may be aware that the process for muting and unmuting looks a little different in Zoom than it has in the past. And so the way that the current process will work is when it is your turn to speak, the host or a co-host will ask you to unmute yourselves. And when that happens, you'll see a message on your screen letting you know that the host would like you to unmute. Each of the organizations will have an opportunity to share with the audience why voting is particularly important from their organization's perspective. We are kindly requesting that you try to limit your responses to 3 minutes so that we can ensure that we stay on schedule. During the town hall, as the moderator is asking questions, only those speakers that the questions are directed to will be unmuted. And again, we will ask the speakers to unmute themselves at that time. And we're kindly asking you try to limit your responses to 5 minutes so that we can get to all of our questions. For the last Q&A portion of our town hall, we will be accepting questions from Facebook. These questions will be open to the entire panel. To maintain order, we're asking that if you would like to respond to a question, to please raise your virtual hand or your actual hand, and the moderator will recognize you. For those people that are not familiar with the raise your hand option, to locate that, you can look at the bottom of your screen and select the participants icon and then the raise your hand option next. For our audience members in Facebook, if you have any questions, please place your questions in the chat and we will try to get to as many questions as we can. Thank you, everyone. And with that said, I will pass it on to our moderator for today's event, Mr. Drake Smith.
Thanks, Ms. Monique. Good evening, everyone. My name is Drake Smith, a senior at Meade High School enrolled in the IB program and student member of the Anne Arundel County Board of Education. I will be your moderator for this evening. We'll begin with this question for each panelist. Why is the 2020 election important to your organization? We will begin with Dr. Andre Mountain of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women Anne Arundel County Chapter.
Okay, there we go. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Andre Mountain. I'm the chapter president for the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, the Anne Arundel County chapter. Our mission is to advocate on behalf of Black women and girls to promote leadership, development, and gender equity in the areas of health, education, and economic empowerment. So voting is advocating. Through elections, voters pick who they want to represent them in elected offices. And with this year's election, it includes the highest position, the presidency, as well as the other congressional representatives. But this process is critical now more than ever. The outcome will affect the community, the states, and the country as a whole. It matters because people who make policy decisions will affect the nation for generations to come. The 2020 elections are significant ways for African Americans to reclaim our to reclaim our voice through our vote. So we've got to get involved in the election. It's our constitutional right. We need people all over to come out and vote. Enough is enough concerning the events taking place today, and people are of conscience need to flood those polls now, again, more than ever. So we need to exercise our vote in this election. Voting really does matter. Voting is advocacy, and we are advocating for ourselves and for others. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mountain. We'll now have Dr. Sean Ashworth of the North Arundel County Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated.
Good evening. Well, Dr. Andre, you said it all. Like you, our mission is to support and to advocate for everyone, specifically our minorities. And so this voting is important. It is important for our voices to be heard. It is important to put the right people in place who care about people, who care about people's human rights, who care about people's basic needs. And so I encourage everyone to get out and vote and make your vote count.
Thank you, Dr. Ashworth. We'll now have Ms. Romika Brashear of Arundel Bay Area Chapter of Jack and Jill of America.
Good evening, everyone. The mission of Jack and Jill of America is a membership organization of mothers with children ages 2 through 19, dedicated to nurturing future African American leaders by strengthening children through leadership development, volunteer service, philanthropic giving, and civic duty. It is our civic duty to vote. It is our civic duty to teach our children and to be models of how we should use our influence in this country and vote. Also, it is our responsibility to vote for a country that is a safe place for our children. So as my sister president said, all votes matter, our votes are important, and we all should be running to the polls to vote this year. Thank you.
Thank you. And for those of you that are just joining us, each panelist is responding to the question, why is the 2020 election important to your organization? We'll next have Ms. Felicia Orr answer this question. She is of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated, the RHOETAZETA chapter.
Thank you, Drake. For the members of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated, this election means so much more than just checking a box, and it means more than electing the next president. The November 3rd election means the security of our future, of our children's futures, and it brings forth the importance of having elected officials who support funding for healthcare and who support a women's right to have a voice in their pregnancy, their birthing process, and a voice in their domestic conditions, and importance of having elected officials who support funding for education. So as a community conscious and action oriented organization, we knew it might be challenging for our members to physically connect with the community in the same ways as we did prior to the pandemic, but we have persevered by continuing with initiatives like our Z Pack It Up program, which addresses some of the issues of underfunded schools by providing school supplies and equipment needed for students to be productive. And as a sisterhood, we are committed to being engaged in the voting process beyond the social media posts with our Get Engaged social action program and our Get Out to Vote toolkit. Our sisterhood has mobilized to find new ways to solve old problems that plague the communities that we serve. And like many of the organizations here today, Zeta Phi Beta Sorority, specifically the state of Maryland and in the Atlantic region, and I know of some of our sister sororities on the call today, have partnered with different organizations to help that cause along. Organizations like We All Vote, When We All Vote, a nonprofit launched in 2018 by Michelle Obama and her colleagues. And also we're happy to have a partnership with Own Your Vote, an initiative launched by Oprah to overcome the voter suppression of Black women in the 2020 election. So both those partnerships are empowering and equipping the members of Zeta Phi Beta with the additional tools and additional resources we need to help prepare voters before going to the polls. So Zeta Phi Beta Sorority, we implore everyone to go out and vote in this election. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Orr. We'll now have Tanya McKinney of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated, Anne Arundel County Alumni Chapter.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of my bachelor's, Adrian Waite, we, the members of Lambda Delta Sigma, would like to thank the collective group for inviting us. First of all, to be a part of this organization as we make an additional impact in the lives of residents of Anne Arundel County. For over 100 years now, the members of my organization have made our voice heard by casting our vote. And that seems to be a running theme through our member organizations. This 2020 presidential election is no different. Our members will make our voices heard in regards to funding for education, which would make our 7 founders proud, who were educators. We will also make our voice heard to make sure that healthcare is a right and not a luxury. When our families, when our women and our children are healthy, our communities thrive. And finally, our members will make our voices heard by casting our vote to make sure that the money that comes back to Anne Arundel County, the community that we serve. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McKinney. But before we go any further, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say that. We've had all the sororities except for the original, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. I had to say that because my mom's an AKA and my sister's an AKA. They would kill me. I'll be bleeding pink and green. So next we'll have Ms. Jacqueline Alsop, president of the Anne Arundel County chapter of the NAACP.
Thank you, Drake. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People is the oldest civil rights organization. There is simply too much at stake for our community not to mobilize in record numbers during the next 3 weeks. It is time to fire the politicians who have failed us and elect the ones that truly have our back. That is why in 10 states, the NAACP has launched phase 2 of our Black Voices Changed Lives, a historic effort to increase Black voter turnout. The 2020 election will be one of the most consequential elections of our lifetime, particularly for Black and Brown Americans. The global pandemic has revealed the continued existence of historic inequality and longstanding policies that disproportionately hit the Black and Brown communities incredibly hard. Our people are dying at rates higher than our portion of the population and have less access to quality health care. Unemployment is nearly twice as high as the white unemployment rate. Black and brown renters are nearly twice as likely as white renters to be evicted. Despite these glaring disparities and rising national death tolls, we must get out and vote. If you're going to vote early or by mail, know what you need to do to ensure that your vote counts. If you are voting on election day, take your mask, bring your ID, a chair, and some food if necessary. However you vote, you cannot and must not let anyone turn you away. Thank you.
Thank you, President Alsop. Once again, the question is, why is the 2020 election important to your organization? We'll next have Reverend Thea Boykin-Wilson, Chair of the Anne Arundel Democratic Central Committee.
Good evening, everyone. I appreciate this opportunity to share. I am the chair of the Anne Arundel County Democratic Central Committee, and as elected members of the Anne Arundel County community, it is our sworn duty to ensure that we educate our community members on the importance of yes voting, being registered to vote, but now how to do so in a safe manner. And so I echo everything that has been so eloquently said about the importance of participating, what I call the layman's access into the governmental system that shapes every aspect of our existence on planet Earth, from the moment you born to the moment you die, and everything in between. Government shapes what we do. And even speaking of planet Earth, we have laws about our relationship to space and the moon and the stars. And so it is crucial that since government is so interwoven into the very fabric of our existence, that we participate. Voting is our reasonable service. It is, again, our access into this system. And so therefore it is, as the heralders in the county for voting, it is crucial that we get the message out of how to do so. And in this election, as it has been said, the most important election in my lifetime and in many of yours as well, that we do so with a vengeance and with a fierceness. So it is extremely important. And thank you for the question, Mr. Smith.
Of course, and thank you. And thank you all for responding, all your wonderful responses. If the viewers at home, you notice all the responders were women, but now, you know, we need someone to follow it up, and it's got to be a man. I wouldn't want to be in those shoes because that's a tough act to follow. So no pressure, but now we'll have Mr. Brandon Cooper of the Maryland Republican Party, first vice chair.
Thank you, Mr. Smith and Mr. Downing, for inviting me. An honor to be here tonight. And to your point, yes, I am first vice chairman of the Maryland Republican Party. And again, I cannot say better what had already been said by the lovely women on this panel with me. But just want to reiterate that it is an important election, but not just in the president and Congress level, but particularly on local level as well. What happened earlier this year with the tragic death and murder of George Floyd, a lot of people are waking up and realizing that we have to be engaged on local level as well. And so here in Anne Arundel County, you know, if you're upset about or you want to have greater reform on how police chiefs are selected, question B on the ballot deals with how police chiefs are elected here in Anne Arundel County. When it comes to issues, you're on the Board of Education, Mr. Smith. If you have issues and concerns with education in the community, it's not just the president and Congress that deals with it, but also the Board of Education elections that are taking place in 3 weeks as well. And for me, when it comes to equal justice under the law, and one of the reasons why I went to law school, we have judges on the ballot as well in 3 weeks. And so this election, as we've all said, is very important from top to bottom. But I'm particularly excited, and I think we all need to be engaged when it comes to voting on local level as well. And just as a point of personal privilege, you mentioned about the male perspective. In addition to being with the Maryland Republican Party, I'm also a member of 100 Black Men of America. And so we've been doing a lot of efforts to engage and register voters as well across this country, here in Maryland as well. And it's important. And one last thing, one thing I think is very important about this election is the fact that millennials, for the first time in 2016, were the largest voting bloc. So those people 20 to 35 years old, we are now the largest voting bloc. And so we always have so much to say on social media. I'm grateful to see that we're starting to turn out in larger numbers in the voting booth, particularly when we have candidates on both sides of the aisle this year in their 70s. This may be the last election where we have a candidate running for president of that generation. And so I'm just really excited to see the millennials turning out in higher votes this election. Hope it continues for elections to come.
Well, thank you, Mr. Cooper. And it's funny that you mentioned the younger voting generation. I'm proud to say that last week I turned 18 on Tuesday, so I was able to vote on Thursday. So it was my first time voting. It was fantastic. Now we'll have a presentation on the 2020 elections. We'll have two presentations. The first one will be by Ms. Tryphena Ellis-Johnson of the Anne Arundel County Board of Elections. She's the vice president.
Good evening, everyone. I'm waiting for the slide presentation. Here we are. Put that in presentation mode for me. There we are. Thank you. Thank you. Voter education webinar. And I am currently serving as the board vice president of the Board of Elections in Anne Arundel County, Tryphena. Next slide, please. Tonight, I will be discussing hopefully some topics that are very, very dear to your heart and important to us as we move through the 2020 election. I'll be talking about deadlines, early voting and vote centers, who can vote, voting and registering on election day, registering to vote online or by mail, updating information, ballot travel and security, and contact information. Next slide, please. Vote by mail deadline. The vote by mail deadline to request a ballot by mail must be received Tuesday, October 20th. Your ballot must be postmarked by Tuesday, November 3rd, 2020, and received no later than Friday, November 13th, 2020 by 10 a.m. And those ballots are time marked and stamped upon arrival. You may return your ballot in person by Tuesday, November 3rd, also 8 p.m. to the Board of Elections office, drop box, and you can also do that by voting in person. Next slide, please. Deadlines, more deadlines. If a voter did not meet the October 13th deadline to vote on November 3rd, you are pre-qualified and checked in using the electronic poll books. If the voter has a Maryland ID or driver's license, if the voter does not have a Maryland ID or is not pre-qualified, they will be issued a provisional ballot. If they're not on the pre-qualified list, then that particular time, the voter will be issued a provisional ballot. Next slide, please. Early voting. Early voting starts Monday, October 26th until Monday, November 2nd. And the voting hours are 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. And who can vote? Any person registered to vote, any person eligible to vote, 18 years of old. As you just heard from our student representative on the Board of Education, Drake Smith, he just voted for the first time. He turned 18 years old, and I'm so proud of you. Pass the word around to all eligible voters 18 years of old by election day. Next slide, please. Early vote centers. We have 7 early vote centers that are located throughout Anne Arundel County. You can see they're listed here: Arundel High, Crofton Middle, North County High, Northeast High, Roger Pitt Moyer Center, Severna Park High School, South River High Schools. And those are the early vote centers that will be open October 26th. Next slide, please. Voting. If you are military or living overseas, you may register to vote in Maryland if your last or current address was in Maryland. You may register to vote on Maryland's online voter registration system, or we call it ALVR. Or you may complete a federal post office application. If you are voting and you are military and you are living overseas, those are some guidelines you can use for voting. We don't want to leave anyone out. Next slide, please. Registering to vote on election day. You may register to vote on election day with approved documentation of residence. And some of those documentations that you would need to have are MVA license, an ID card, a change of address card, a paycheck, a bank statement, a utility bill, or other government issued ID with your name and new address. Should receive voter notification card within 3 weeks. Next slide, please. Registering to vote online or by mail. Using Maryland's online voter registration system, which we just said, ALVR, or you may print an application from the Board of Elections website. Or you may contact your local Board of Elections or state Board of Elections. And you also need to have a Maryland license, MVA card, or you may use the last 4 digits of your social, the last 4 digits. And please remember to sign the application. Next slide, please. If you plan to register anyone other than yourself, you or your family member, then it is recommended that you become a voter registration volunteer, which is a VRV. And you may contact the Board of Elections for detail. It is a training class, and it normally takes about 40 minutes to about an hour. And this will equip you with the tool that you need to go out into the community to register voters. And it is required that if you're not registering family members, that you do take the class, Voter Registration Volunteer, a VRV. Next slide, please. Updating your name and address. Sometimes we hear people say, I didn't get my voter registration application. So it is important that if you move, to please update your name and address. You may do it by going to the Maryland Online Voter Registration System, ALVR again, local Board of Elections, a change of address at the MVA, a voter registration application. And for the 2020 presidential general election, you can update your address during early voting with an election official. So you do have many options of updating your voter registration information. Next slide, please. Ballot travel. I've been asked the question, what happens to my ballot, Ms. Ellis-Johnson? Once I turn my ballot or put my ballot into the drop box, what happens to my ballot? And I hope to give you some information this evening to give you the travel of a ballot. The ballots are picked up from the drop boxes twice daily by a bipartisan team of the Board of Elections employees. That means we have a Democrat and a Republican who are picking up our ballots twice daily from the drop boxes. The employees will keep count of the ballots removed from the drop boxes, and the ballots will be checked in when the ballots are returned to the Board of Elections. And again, when the ballots do return to the Board of Elections, they're also checked in with another bipartisan team. Next slide, please. Ballot security. I've had this question too, as we know that there are many drop boxes located throughout Anne Arundel County, and we want to know what is the security of the drop boxes within the county. So I'm hoping I can run through a little security for you this evening to hopefully give you that comfort level of knowing it's okay to put your ballot in the ballot drop box. A bipartisan pair will visit the drop boxes, as I said earlier, twice a day. A care, custody, and control form is completed by the bipartisan team. A tamper tape and seal numbers are verified with the bipartisan team. Ballots are transferred to a blue ballot transfer bin, and a new tamper tape is used for the next bin. And they're also verified at the board with the care, custody, and control forms once the ballots are reached to the Board of Elections. And they're checked into MD voters upon removal from the bin. Hopefully that gives you a little understanding of how the ballots are removed from the drop boxes and transferred to the Board of Elections. There is a very high security process that we use. Next slide, please. And in conclusion, you may contact the Board of Elections. We're located at 6740 Bay Meadow Drive. You may also call the Board of Elections and go to the www.vote.org, and you may find more information on your voting, and the state board, which is also located in Annapolis. And while I have this opportunity to speak, I just wanted to share some numbers with you. The board, we are currently canvassing ballots, and we're canvassing now, I believe this is day 10 that we have started canvassing ballots. And I just wanted to drop a few numbers with you. The Board of Elections, we have sent out 149,554 ballots in Anne Arundel County. I repeat, 149,554 ballots in Anne Arundel County. To date, we have ran through our ballot machine 37,665. And those were coming from the drop boxes. And we still have 96,374 ballots out. So you can see we still have quite a few ballots that are out in Anne Arundel County. And with those figures that I have just presented to you, that gives us a total of 35.56%. 35.5% of the ballots that we have sent out from the Board of Elections have been returned to us. So you can see we have received a third of the ballots, and we still have 2/3 of the ballots that we're still looking for, and we hope to count 100% of the ballots. That concludes my presentation for this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis-Johnson. And just one thing on the voter box, I don't think you touched on this. They also have a security camera system, right, from the police department.
True. We do have the security cameras out there. I believe it's Live Feed that is our sponsor for the security cameras. Our ballot drop boxes are under 24/7 watch. They're very well protected. So far, we've had no issues with the ballot drop boxes. The Board of Elections has an opportunity. They can key in on those Zoom cameras at any given point in time. We even watch them during our board meetings that we have now on a daily basis. We have very good control with the security cameras.
Well, the only thing they're missing is like an armed guard.
Well, we don't want to do anything to the voters to disenfranchise them to come out and cast their ballot. We want the voter to feel comfortable. We want you to know that we see you, but we don't want you to feel discouraged and knowing that maybe a police car is out there watching you. We want you to feel comfortable in coming to the ballot drop box and any of our vote centers that will be opening up soon to cast your ballot, because we want those ballots. We want them back. We want them back. We want to count everyone.
Fantastic. Well, Ms. Ellis-Johnson, thank you again for that thorough information. If you couldn't tell, she used to be a teacher. She was one of my teachers. That's why.
Yes, I was one of your teachers. I was so happy to see you. You come a long way, and I'm so proud of you.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis-Johnson. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, next we'll have a presentation from Ms. Alfa Stevens, President of the Anne Arundel County Anne Arundel County League of Women Voters.
Good evening, everyone. And thank you to the collective group for inviting the League of Women Voters. And thank you to the collective group for hosting this educational webinar. It's very important that we be educated. And I can only second all the comments made by those members of that panel as to how important it is. Now, I'm going to attempt to share a presentation, so bear with me. Okay, I think we're ready. I actually received, I think I got crossed. I received two requests, and so I've kind of combined them, and I hope that the information I share will be meaningful. First, a little bit about the League of Women Voters and who we are. We are a nonpartisan political organization. We support no party and no candidate. The League of Women Voters is a grassroots organization, and we focus on political action and civic engagement. And we do it through encouraging informed and active participation in government. We work to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and we influence public policy through education and advocacy. So education and advocacy are really our prime mission, and we do advocacy. Actually, we only advocate on positions and issues that we have studied and issues that we have reached a consensus on. So you can go to the League of Women Voters website and you can see a list of those positions, and there are many. We were founded in 1920 by Carrie Chapman Catt during the National American Women's Suffrage Association Convention. That was 6 months before the 19th Amendment was ratified, and 72 years after a long struggle that began in 1848. Our mission is to empower voters and defend democracy. 2020 marks our centennial anniversary for both the National League and the Maryland State League. There's 700 plus leagues across 50 states and US territories. The League of Women Voters of Anne Arundel County is one of 15 state leagues in Maryland, and we were founded in 1944. Membership is open to all persons 16 years and older, and quiet as it's kept. I know our name says League of Women Voters, but we do have men. We have men on our membership rolls, and we have men working. Our co-president of the state league is a gentleman, Mr. Richard Wilson, and our voter services lead is another gentleman, Mr. Ralph Watkins. They are very busy. And a third one is the lead or co-lead on our action committee. So we welcome you. And if during this presentation you see yourself, feel free to join us. What does it mean to vote? I think we covered that pretty good, so I don't have to linger on that, but I will tell you that telling your elected officials and lawmakers how you feel about important issues is key. You get to talk about education issues, public safety, healthcare, you name it, but you want your voice heard. And it's a chance for you to engage in the democratic process. Why people don't vote, we've heard many reasons why people don't vote. Number one is my vote doesn't count. Well, quiet as it's kept, your vote does count. Your vote is your voice, your responsibility, and your duty. And in this list of reasons why it's important to vote, I would point out two of my favorites. Who votes counts. Elected officials know which communities and which age groups and which affinity groups are voting, and the communities with the fewer voters get less attention. The squeaky wheel gets the oil, so you want to make your voices heard. And my other favorite is when others vote and you don't, you may not like the outcome. Why is it important to vote? And I think you'll recognize many of the names on this slide. Well, because of all who came before. And you'll see Ida B. Wells and Mary Church Terrell, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. They were participants in the early suffrage movement. Delta Sigma Theta was the only Black organization to participate in that suffrage parade in 1913, even though they marched at the back, they were there. So was Ida B. Wells. Augusta Chisel and Margaret Gregory Hawkins were suffragists in Baltimore, and they organized a suffrage club in trying to educate their communities on, okay, we're getting the vote now, we need to be informed and we need to know what we're voting about. The civil rights members, Fannie Lou Hamer and Ella Baker and Congressman Lewis and Martin Luther King, all of those names I know you're familiar with. Senator Verda Welcome, she's from Maryland, I know you're familiar with her. Probably less known as Evelyn T. Butts. Evelyn T. Butts is the woman who took the Commonwealth of Virginia to the US Supreme Court with a case to abolish state poll tax. So it's important to vote for all of those people, and there could be many more names on this slide. I don't have room for all those names, but for all those who will come after as well. We know why it's important to vote. We had the 15th, 19th, and 24th amendments to the Constitution, and still for many people of color, it took more years to exercise that right to vote. So we had the 15th Amendment that granted Black men the right to vote in 1870. The 19th Amendment granted women the right to vote in 1920. And the 24th Amendment, which outlawed the poll tax as a requirement in federal elections, was passed in 1962. But despite all those amendments, it still took the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, and a 1966 US Supreme Court decision that eliminated the state poll tax. And that was the Evelyn Butts case. Your vote counts. Every vote counts. Many elections are won by a few hundred votes. Your vote counts. Your vote could be the deciding vote. Your vote counts. You vote to affect change, and how often do you get that chance? Your vote counts. So I was part of another presentation earlier this week, and it was pointed out that in the 2018 election for one of the positions in the House of Delegates, that the vote came down to a difference of 7 votes. So your votes count. So now you're registered to vote, you know how important it is to vote, and you want to be informed about the issues. So you educate yourself to the extent that you are, or you feel that you're sufficiently informed. You learn about the candidates, you learn about the issues, do some online research, read the papers, digital media. Each candidate has a website and you ought to take a look at it. But here's where I think is a very important and very useful resource. And it is the website vote411.org. And there you can find the League of Women Voters Guide. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in detail. In this guide, you will find the candidates' answers to a nonpartisan questionnaire. Each candidate gets this questionnaire and they come back with responses in their own words. We don't edit, modify, change anything. It's their words. And also in the Voters Guide, you will see, someone spoke earlier about the ballot questions. You will see the pros and cons on the ballot questions. You'll see a lot of detail in this voter's guide about the issues and the candidates, and I think it's a very helpful resource. So you get to vote411.org, and your page should look like this. So you see links to register to vote, and Tryphena already talked about that. You can check your voter registration status, because you might think that you're registered to vote and you're not. And you can also find out what's on your ballot. So if you click on the link that says what's on your ballot, you'll come to a page that looks like this, and you enter your address and it builds your ballot for you. So now you have your ballot with the candidates and the issues, and then you can go to the voter's guide, and you can research the candidates and the issues. So for instance, I think this is showing the cover. It's actually, this slide is actually showing the cover of the voter's guide and the table of contents. That's the page. So in the voter's guide for Anne Arundel County, you will find information on the president, and they've been asked questions, the candidates running for the office of president, and your representatives in Congress, the judges that Mr. Cooper talked about earlier, their judges, their Board of Education candidates they're running. There are state ballot questions, local ballot questions. All of these have been outlined and given information on. There's even a legislative district map. And then there's the list of the drop-off locations. Now this slide is showing the League of Women Voters of Anne Arundel County, the voter's guide, but actually there is a voter's guide for each county in the state of Maryland. So if you were to go to LWVMD.org, there's a map, and you can click on your county and you can bring up the guide that's particular to your county. So this is where the state ballot questions are outlined. There are 2 state ballot questions, and I'm not going to go through all of this. I would just encourage you to go to pick up that guide and read this for yourself. But it's formatted such that it states what the amendment is. It tells you about the origin of the question, how it's currently operating, what the proposed change is, and then you have arguments for and against. And then in this particular instance, this is the one that authorizes the General Assembly in enacting a balanced budget bill for fiscal year 2024 and each year after to increase, diminish, or add items, provided that the General Assembly may not exceed the total proposed budget as submitted by the governor. So if you vote for this amendment, it means that the legislature will be able to adjust spending in the governor's budget by reducing some items and increasing others, as long as the total amount of spending does not exceed the amount of spending proposed by the governor. And if you vote against the constitutional amendment, it means that the current law would just remain in place. The legislature can only do what they're doing now, reduce expenditures within the budget proposed by the governor. So that is how it's laid out. There's been research done, and this is all put together by League of Women Voters members. And question 2 is about, on the state question 2 is about commercial gaming. Do you approve the expansion of commercial gaming in the state of Maryland to authorize sports and events betting for the primary purpose of raising revenue for education? And you get a chance to vote for or against. And if you vote for Again, it means that the General Assembly will be able to pass legislation that establishes a program of sports wagering and event wagering in Maryland. Here's the part we pay attention to, with a portion of the revenue going to support public education. A vote against would mean that commercial wagering on sporting events will remain illegal in Maryland. So I would just invite you to read that there are arguments against and for, and the League of Women Voters doesn't have a position one way or the other. We just present the facts and you make your own decisions. So likewise for the ballot, there are 7 ballot questions particular to Anne Arundel County. And their format is much the same as the state. They give the ballot language. They will tell you where this question originated from, what the present practice is, what the proposed change is, and now you get to vote for or against. And they will also give the pros and cons. I think that's it. So now you're registered to vote and you know where to go and you're ready to take action. You're informed because you've been to vote411.org and you've reviewed your voter's guide. And so now you make your plan for voting. You're going to plan to get help if you need it or give help if it's needed. Another way that you could take action is to become an election judge. And this is something that I learned in this last presentation, that 16-year-olds can be election judges. Is that correct, Tryphena?
I believe 16 or 17, maybe 17, but I know it's in that age range.
Yeah, I think Joe said 16, but
okay, 16.
Yeah. You can also become, there's a software app that's been developed by the MITRE Corporation called Squint. And they're checking social media for accuracy because, you know, they have, sometimes the social media and websites don't have the correct information, but they're trying to keep an eye out for that. And then, of course, you vote. We've all been saying that this evening. There are 4 ways to vote, and Tryphena shared that with you, the 4 ways to vote. And here are some contact links if they're helpful. We do have a Facebook page and we have a website, and I've outlined again the Vote 411 website, the State Board of Elections. So if you want information, I will point you to the State Board of Elections, or I will point you to the League of Women Voters website. And there's also one other one that we also invite people to remember, jot it down somewhere, the Election Protection Hotline for any issues that you might have or problems even on the day of voting. It's 866-OUR-VOTE. And that hotline is staffed with attorneys and also those versed in what the election procedure should be. And then again, it's important to vote. We had strong reason to pin our hopes on all these people. They didn't disappoint. So now it's our turn. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens, for that wonderful and detailed information. In the words of Biggie Smalls, if you don't know, now you know.
All right.
So we really appreciate that. Now we'll move on. Of course. Now we'll move on to predetermined questions, and we'll start with Reverend Thea Boykin-Wilson. The first question is, how are you preparing your constituents to address voter suppression and intimidation?
Thank you for that question. I think Ms. Stevens mentioned one of the resources, and that's 1-866-OUR-VOTE. I actually know the founder, Barbara Arnwine, Esquire, who is an advocate for voter suppression and an expert in our country. That's one of the ways. The Maryland Democratic Party also has a voter protection effort that we want our constituents to know, and that we have been putting out on our websites to ensure that our constituents know that if they see something, they need to say something, or they experience any issues with voting. This, again, is one of the most contentious elections in modern history that I can recall. And having a plan of action is important. I want to say that again. We need to have a plan. We've talked, like my mother used to say, we beat the horse about how to vote, but we must have a plan just in case our plan is not executed. So make sure that you also know about the Maryland Democratic Party, if you are a Democrat, to contact their voter protection effort by visiting, by calling 833-MD-VOTES. So that's 833-MD-VOTES. And I'll put it in the chat when I finish talking. It's 833-638-6837. Or you can also email this protection effort by visiting voterprotection@mddems.org. The point here is to do something. Just don't experience and walk away. There must be an action plan that you have in place. And what we are communicating to our constituent base is to log these numbers, these two numbers that we have referenced in their cell phones, and also these email addresses, to be mindful that they have help. You do have help from experts who know what to do and how to engage in situations where you may find yourself having a difficulties in voting. And there have been some. I know that's not part of the question, Mr. Smith, but I will say that we have been experiencing issues with some ballots. And so I will leave it at that and maybe address it at a later time. I don't know how much time I have.
Well, actually, in the program, we're actually under time. So.
Oh, I'm under time. Okay. Well, speaking of being protected when you vote, make sure that you compare the actual ballot that you get with the sample ballot that you get. We have gotten some reports that some names have been missing. And I'm not saying that this is in Anne Arundel, but in my position, I cover a wide range. I'm also the chair of the African American Diversity Leadership Council for the entire state. So I'm also speaking from that perspective. We have heard from constituents that the ballot does not match the sample ballot. So we want to make sure that people understand that they need to check that all the names on the ballot are there. And I'm sure all of you have also heard about some fake ballot boxes popping up in certain areas. And if it's not the legitimate, certifiable Maryland Board of Election ballot box, and I'm sure my sister Tryphena Ellis-Johnson can echo, don't put your ballot in that box if it does not look like it is official. These are some of the things that we want to make sure that people understand. And also, if you vote in person, we've also heard of issues in other states. So we want to make sure that Marylanders know that any poll worker should not write on your ballot. And if they do, you ask for another one. And these are some tactics that are happening in other states. And we want to be in front of that effort, that issue, to protect our vote, to make sure our vote counts. The 1866 Our Vote is very easy to remember. That is a resource, and the 833 MD Votes is as well. You can't get through to one, you have another. And so those are the things that I wanted to bring to our attention, and make sure that you make note and share this information. Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Well, thank you, Ms. Boykin-Wilson. And
you're welcome.
We have another question for you, but I think you may have touched on this just a little bit in your first response. What is your organization doing to combat disinformation or misinformation? What strategies would you recommend voters use to identify disinformation?
Well, we've been hearing this word over and over again about fact checking. We want to make sure that we do that. I think I think Ms. Stevens also touched on this when she mentioned that there has been an effort for fact checkers on social media. That's, you know, unfortunately, if the biggest voting block, as we heard from our brother who spoke earlier, about the biggest voting block being the millennials. We want to make, and most millennials get their information where? On social media. We want to make sure that the information that you are receiving is correct and truthful. So what I communicate to our constituent base is to make sure that you check reliable sources. Your Board of Elections. That BOE can stand one for another, especially when you work in both. Board of Elections, make sure that you check your central committees, your local central committees. We have, the Anne Arundel County Central Committee has dedicated an entire website for Anne Arundel County constituents, Democratic Anne Arundel constituents. It's AnneArundelVotes.com. It is jam-packed with information on how to vote. Check out AnneArundelVotes.com. Make sure that you also check with your state party for the correct information. These are valid resources and not social media. That's the last place I will check. When in doubt, call the Board of Elections for the information. That's what I would highly recommend. When in doubt, call the Board of Elections, and Ms. Ellis-Johnson gave that information. I'd put it on speed dial during the 2020 election if I was everybody listening. Because they are, and I've tried them out for myself, and I know they answer the calls. They are answering those questions both at the state level and the local level, because we also understand that we have federal, state, and local elections going on at the exact same time, including all the ballot measures that Ms. Stevens just highlighted. And we certainly appreciate the League of Women for the work that they do in educating us on this information, because it could be daunting, but you got one-stop shop with that 411.org, which I use, and the vote.org. So we're not absent of resources, Mr. Smith. We want those who are watching to know that the organizations that are here tonight, I'm offering the Anne Arundel email, AnneArundelDems@gmail.com. If you have any questions, we will be glad to answer. Thank you.
Thank you for that. It's actually interesting that you mentioned the phone numbers. It made me think of apps, phone apps. Does the Anne Arundel County Board of Elections or the League of Women Voters, do they have a phone app that people can download? And speaking from the youth generation, you know, we don't memorize phone numbers anymore.
Not to my knowledge, but that's a very good app that I'll make a recommendation for.
Well, I can say this. It was also mentioned, you know, we all are, a wealth of information, all of us using the same. When We All Vote, that is an app. And I have it on my phone. the organization that First Lady, let me get myself together, our former First Lady, Michelle Obama, and others, who they founded this organization. And the Our Vote app is an app that you can download on your phone right now. And it has many of the information that we are talking about tonight. It also allows you an opportunity to engage with your contacts in your phone. So if you have friends that you want to make sure that they vote, guess what? Their voting record is on that Our Vote app. And you can invite them, at least 5 friends. This app is encouraging you to invite the friends that don't vote to get out and register and vote. And in the state of Maryland, I know my sister, Miss Ellis-Johnson, gave those deadlines, but in the state of Maryland, you can even register and vote on the same day. That is a privilege that we have in the state of Maryland. We don't want you to wait to that long, but it is an option. So never think it's too late. But that Our Vote app, it's Our Vote. You want to make sure that you consider that vote. I mean, that application. I want to make sure that I'm saying it right because I have it on my phone. It's Out Vote. I'm sorry, Out, O-U-T Vote. Out Vote app. You can download it on Play Store if you have an Android, or the Apple Store if you have an iPhone. So there's your app, Mr. Smith.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for those responses. Now we're going to turn over to Mr. Brandon Cooper for a few questions. The first one is, how are you preparing your constituents to address voter suppression and intimidation?
Thank you again for having me on. I always use a lot of quotes because I know I'm not the smartest person in the world. And so one thing I'll start off by saying is, I will unite with anyone to do right, no one to do wrong. Quote from one of my favorite Black Republicans, Frederick Douglass. So I think this is one thing that me and I think Dr. Boykin-Wilson can agree on, is that as many people need to be able to vote as possible. And so we're talking about apps and ways to get people to vote. I go straight to the horse's mouth, elections.maryland.gov. That's the State Board of Elections website. You can easily remember it, elections.maryland.gov. It's nonpartisan state government office, even though Governor Hogan's the governor. It's a nonpartisan organization that has all the information right there about how to vote just for Marylanders. Even has a little rumor control site on there. I know it's not my question, but you're asking about misinformation. Even on that website, right on the homepage, is a rumor control website that allows you information to make sure that you know how to get access to vote. So I think that's one thing that's key to make sure people know about. When it comes to, again, like you said, making sure people have access to voting here in Maryland, particularly during this global pandemic where things are just so different. We tried the all mail-in voting in the primary, and particularly for me, for someone who just graduated law school a year or so ago and lives in apartments and moved a lot, I didn't get my absentee ballot in the mail. And so I know going forward into this fall general election, Governor Hogan has made it so that every voter is getting an absentee ballot, if that's the way you want to do it, but also to have the ability to do it in person as well, or to drop it off in the drop boxes. So I think it's key that we give voters as many avenues to get their vote in, because it is part of our civic duty and something that's so important. And so I think that's one thing, again, that we're able to do across the state to make it so that folks have access to be able to vote either way they want to do it. As you were talking about earlier, voter registration is one thing that we at the state party is taking seriously as well. We've been registering voters, particularly the Kim Klacik campaign in Baltimore, 5 days a week for the past 3 months in downtown Baltimore, registering voters, Republican, Democrat, Independent, doesn't matter, because again, getting you access to vote is so key. Registered over 700 people in Baltimore City alone over the last 3 months, people who had not been registered to vote before, getting them access to voting. And so that deadline, I think, passed, correct me if I'm wrong, 2 days ago, but you can still register in person for voting as well. So it's going forward as well. So getting folks to be able to have access to register to vote in all ways, and also being able to cast their ballot, whether it's by mail, the drop box we talked about. I don't want to reiterate what I cannot say better than the colleagues that said before me, but it's making sure that we all have that access to vote that's unabridged. So I think that's all key in ways that we're working, regardless, unite to do right and nobody to do wrong, to make sure that we all have access to vote here in Maryland.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you for that wonderful information. So we're going to continue hanging with Mr. Cooper, and we have one more for you.
I haven't heard that since high school, man. It's been a while.
We're taking the old school tonight.
There you go.
Well, the next question is, how do we as parents/community members encourage a culture and responsibility for civic engagement beyond what is being modeled in the home? For example, by seeing your parents vote and volunteer.
That's a good question. I always tell people that I'm as a Black Republican, people always ask me, how I become a Republican. I always tell people that I'm a first-generation college graduate, but also a first-generation Republican. And I just appreciate my mother giving me the fortitude to have that freedom of thought in the home. But she showed me at a young age how important it was to be engaged in voting. She's volunteered for Obama when he ran in 2016. And so it's always been something in my household that's been important. But as a community, I think doing things I'm doing right now, I think all of us on this call are involved in civic organizations, myself, 100 Black men, a bunch of sororities on the call, and civic groups that are out there doing forums like this in order to engage voters on a nonpartisan basis. I think that's the key aspect, particularly in the Black community, where our right to vote has not always been given freely. And even when it was quote unquote legal, there are still barriers to it. The Black church, in particular, the Black civic leaders, community leaders, have always been key in the backbone of it. And I think they need to continue to play that kind of role in getting our community out to vote and understand the power that comes with the ballot. And so I think, again, social media is something that's big for our generation, but it can't be the end all be all. When this pandemic is over, I look forward to getting more involved in person and continuing doing stuff like this in a webinar fashion, not just during election year. It's important to do it 3 weeks before the election, but we need to do this all year round because there's always elections going on. Right now it's the presidential, 2 years is midterms. In between there, a lot of municipal elections are going on as well that we need to be involved in. And so I think it's kind of a all the above a kind of approach, but particularly I think civic organizations like the collective on this call right now can play a crucial role, making sure that we have this civic engagement because it matters. I mean, I think in the last few years, I've only been voting now for about 12 years, but I definitely see some change now recently and a little more engagement than I've seen, at least in my life, and talking about it. I don't know if that's a byproduct of social media, putting it in our face constantly, or if it's just a changing in times. But I think we need now more than ever to understand that the problems we see and the change we want in our community, a huge part of it, not the end all be all, but a huge part of it comes from people we elect. And I forget who said it earlier today, but they said, we need to be ready to fire the politicians who are in office who aren't addressing what we're doing and they're not addressing the needs in our community. And again, to end on a quote, Ice Cube said earlier today that Black progress is a bipartisan issue, and I believe that wholeheartedly. And so I want to thank everyone today for inviting me on and having this bipartisan, nonpartisan discussion on the importance of voting.
Well, thank you so much for Mr. Cooper. That was truly wonderful. Just a note, Ms. Thea Boykin-Wilson, she put a few resources in the chat. The Our Vote app, that was the app she was talking about. 833-MD-VOTES. 833-MD-VOTES, that's a phone number that you can call for voter protection. Then ArundelVotes.com, that's resources for Anne Arundel County voters and local elections as well. And then there's 866 Our Vote, and that's voter protection. So some wonderful resources that you can check out at the conclusion of this event. The next questions are for Ms. Ellis-Johnson. And the first question is, if a voter chooses to mail their ballot at the Board of Elections drop boxes, what happens next? What assurances do voters have that their ballot will be counted? Once the ballot is placed in the drop box, what happens next with the ballot? Now, you kind of already touched on this a lot in your presentation. So if you could just provide any more detail, that'd be wonderful.
Well, first of all, we want you to know that your ballot is secured. If you take your ballot to the drop box, it will be collected by a bipartisan team. If you're going directly to the Board of Elections. Also, if you're taking your ballot to one of the drop box locations, it will be collected by a bipartisan team. We have a Democrat and a Republican. They will ensure the accuracy and making sure that your ballot will be counted from the moment that they collect your ballot until your ballot reaches the Board of Elections, there is a security process that I explained earlier. There's a security tape that's involved, the accuracy and logic accounting is involved. So there's a form that they fill out, and that form is double checked again once it gets to the Board of Elections. So there is a process involved. Don't just think that your ballot is being dropped in the drop box, hauled to the Board of Elections. There is an accuracy test involved when the bipartisan team pick up your ballot from the drop box and transport it to the Board of Elections, so that once it reaches the Board of Elections, the bipartisan team again will have the ballot, review the ballot, making sure that it's good and it's okay to run through the machine to count the ballot. And once that's done, then your ballot is considered counted. Now, if there are some issues with the ballot, then those issues are brought to the board members. But right now, our high-speed machines are doing a very good job at counting the ballots. We count thousands of ballots a day. I think right now we're averaging about 7,000 to 8,000 ballots a day that we're counting through the high-speed machines. Just want to remind people that we have 11 days to early voting and 19 days to election day. So make sure we get those ballots in. I'm missing 2/3 of the ballots. We want to get all the ballots in, all the ballots counted. So there is an accuracy and logic test involved when you drop your ballot off and get to the table of the bipartisan team.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ms. Ellis-Johnson. It sounds like the ballots really like money. When you drop it off in a bank, nothing's going to happen to it.
It's safe. It's secure. It's insured. It's a bipartisan team.
All right. That's what I'm talking about. And the next question is, what lessons were learned from the primaries regarding the impact of voting during the COVID-19 pandemic?
We learned that it's important to have plenty of supplies on hand. We don't want to run out of any ballots. We want to make sure that all of our vote centers are counted and covered when we run out of ballots. Because we have vote centers, we have multiple styles of ballots at the vote centers. We want to make sure that we have multiple ballots available for the various ballot styles at the various vote centers. We don't want to run out of any supplies. We have a team of Board of Election employees who are their job is just to go around to make sure and ensure that all voting centers are equipped with the supplies that they need to make sure that the 2020 election run as smooth as possible. We are giving out face masks. We are encouraging social distancing. So we ask that when you go to the polls and vote centers that you pack your patients with you. There may be some wait. There may be some volunteers who are offering to give some water, but we want to ensure that there are plenty of ballots available when you do come to the vote center. We do not run out of any style ballots, and plenty of supplies are available. We even have machines, backup machines available to have in place. 10% of our equipment we have reserved in case there's an equipment malfunction. We're able to go out to the different vote centers and replace that equipment so that everything that we can think of possible to keep the election running smooth, it runs smooth as possible. We just don't want to run out of anything. We're trying to make sure that all of our constituents have a pleasant experience with the 2020 voting process.
Well, that is so wonderful to hear. It's always nice to hear democracy in action. So I'm really glad to hear that. Our next few questions are from Ms. Alfa Stevens. How do we as parents / community members encourage a culture and responsibility for civic engagement beyond what is being modeled in the home? For example, by seeing your parents vote and volunteer.
Well, I think that you continue to model and you engage in civic experiences and opportunities And I think importantly, you continue to teach the history. And I think that makes an impact. If you know, the saying goes, if you know where you come from, you know where you're going. And I think it's very important for us to know the history of voting and make yourselves available for certain opportunities. I know the legislature has pages and intern opportunities to work with the county exec. And just look out for those kind of positions where you can learn and be educated more. And then I would also say, probably on a more personal note, that when your children and grandchildren reach that magic age of 16, before the Sweet 16 party starts, get them registered to vote.
Well, thank you so much for that, Ms. Stevens. The next question is, where would someone go to learn more about the questions on their ballot? For example, what resources are available to find out the background or history behind the ballot so that voters can have a better understanding of what they're voting for? I think this question is referring to vote411.org. You already touched on this a little bit, but I think it never hurts to reiterate something so important as this, or say it again, just for those people that are just
So yes, I will reiterate that the best one-stop shop for the research and history behind the ballot questions and the candidates and the issues is vote411.org and the League of Women Voters Voters Guide. I think that will be your best resource. It's not the only one, but I would say it's probably the best one.
It's tried and true.
Tried and true.
All right. Now we'll move on to the Facebook questions, and this is open to any panelist to respond to. And just by raising your hand, I'll call on you and you can respond to the question. So the first question is, how would someone that is visually impaired or physically handicapped receive assistance with voting? Ms. Ellis-Johnson.
That's a great question. And I believe that in our ballots, we have a voter assistance form. If there is a voter that needs assistance voting, they may have the person assisting them to complete the voter assistance form. And they can submit that form with the person they are assisting their ballot. However, if the voter is unable to sign, the voter that's assisting them will sign their name and date it. But the person they're assisting may have some physical disability and unable to sign. But it's important that they put at least a check mark in that line or an X on that line or something to indicate that they have given the voter assistance the authority to assist them with the completion of their ballot.
Well, thank you for that. And I guess the same question is, did you touch on in-person voting, right? If you're physically impaired or handicapped in person?
In-person voting, you may have assistance. So what in particular is their disability, did they say? Because in-person voting, there's a team of election judges, but it's important that if they are unable to vote, if they're in person, to have someone, maybe a family member with them, because we want their ballots to be confidential as possible. So I know by mail, we have the voter assistance form. In person, I'm not sure, but I know maybe a family member can assist them.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ms. Ellis-Johnson. Would anyone else like to respond? I think she pretty much covered it. Great. So the next question is, why do you believe voter turnout was lower in 2016? What are some strategies we can implement to increase voter turnout in the next election?
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry. Repeat it one more time.
Of course. Why do you believe voter turnout was lower in 2016? What are some strategies we can implement to increase voter turnout in the next election?
Okay, I'll attempt. Everyone has an opinion about, voter turnout in 2016. I don't have answers for it because really, I don't understand people who don't vote. If you understand, like I mentioned earlier, the connection of government to your everyday life. From the moment you come home from the hospital, that hospital is regulated by law, to the car seat you go into, to the car you drive to go home, to the roads you're on, to the house to get there, to the house you enter into, from the top of that house to the roof, to the bottom, to the time you go to school, you get married, your education, what you learn in school is regulated by law, your diploma, if you die, the mortician, the cemetery, everything's regulated by law. So not participating in voting to elect representation or add your voice to the decisions of the goods, the services, the policies that shape where you live. I don't understand why people don't vote. So in 2016, I think perhaps it was not enough education of the importance of voting, from our schools to our churches to our homes. Personally, I teach my children I taught my daughters. I have 3 daughters. When they turned 16, and they got their driver's license, they understood that the next thing you do is register to vote. And so I think perhaps part of it, I don't have all the answers to this, but I'll take a stab at part of it is a lack of understanding of the importance of voting in certain communities. Now, you said why we didn't have turnout. If we want to break it down to a demographic, we can go there, Mr. Smith, but you didn't give me a demographic to talk about. You gave me a general statement. Some have said that the candidates that were at the top of the ticket affected the outcome of whether they would come out or not. And most politics is local. In a presidential campaign, a presidential election, you also, as we said over and over again, you're also voting not just for president at the federal level, you're voting for positions that shape it, from the school board to congressional candidates to all the other, the seats that we spoke about that are all on 411.org and vote.org and the League of Women's website. So how to improve that is doing what we're doing now. I think having conversations starting at home, sir, and into stressing the importance of government and civic engagement in our classrooms. I think some of that has been lost in our curriculum. To educate our students on their role in elections. I'm going to advocate for that. I'm part of an advocacy organization. I am a member of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, and it is part of our mission is to educate our people on the role of government. So those are some of the things we can do, and in this collective gathering together and pooling, and stop working so much in silos in this area, but pooling our resources together to broaden and expand our reach into the community of people who don't vote in your community. I think that will help, sir.
Thank you so much. I see Mr. Cooper had his hand up.
Yep. And yeah, surprisingly, we agree on basically everything, I think. Very key that you said that it was the lack of connection of understanding how important your vote is. And I think it had been tied too much to personality. And so looking at some of the statistics, I'm a data guy, President Obama had the highest turnout of Black supporters in the history of this country. We actually surpassed in 2008 white turnout. Blacks voted at the highest of any demographic in this country in 2008, and it just dropped sharply when it came to 2016. I think that was directly because of the candidates on both sides did not bring it out. And I think you mentioned that you didn't ask a question about turnout based on demographics, but 2016, it really was just the Black vote that had a dramatic turnout. Millennials and Generation Z actually had an increase in vote. Women changed by 1%. Latinos changed by 1%. It was the Black community that dropped by 8% or so. And not even states that, you know, I know we talked about voter suppression. I called out North Carolina GOP on it before, but even Michigan, where there were no changes in the law at all on elections, there was still a drop of 8 to 10% of the votes between two election cycles. So I definitely think it was a disconnect of people not understanding that regardless of who names on the ballot, it's going to impact you somehow. And that we can't just rely on, you know, the celebrity status of certain candidates. We need to be excited and informed about voting, even if the candidates on the ballot may not be the most engaging or exciting for you. Someone's going to win that election. Someone's going to be in office making those decisions. And so I think it just goes back to having a greater town hall engagement effort that we're doing to make sure people know how your vote impacts your life on a daily basis, particularly on local level as well. But I just thought that was very interesting that it was, the drop off was 2016, and it was kind of unique to the Black community about all the demographics. And I'm not sure, but I'm pretty confident that this year will not be the same, be a record turnout again, hopefully in our community.
Great, thank you for that. Can't beat the data. Any other responses? Great. Next question. Now that we are expecting a larger than normal number of mail-in ballots, approximately when will we find out the results of the election?
I don't want to answer all the questions, but I researched this, y'all, because I'm anxious about this election. Anybody anxious about the, can we be real? Can we be for real on this? You know, there are a lot of important dates about this election. Most people don't understand that the presidential election, specifically for presidential candidates, is a two-step process. Did you know that? And who we're actually voting for are electors who are part of the electoral college. And so it's sort of a horse race in every state to see who gets those electoral colleges. I mean, electors votes that are part of the electoral college. In the state of Maryland, we have 10 on the Republican side, and we have 10 on the Democratic side. And if the popular vote decides that it swings Democratic, then Maryland's 10 votes, 10 elector, it's a mouthful. It's a mouthful at this hour to say. Electors go to the Democratic candidate and vice versa if the popular vote goes to the Republican candidate. And so knowing that, you vote and you have, I think Tryphena can help me, you have until, I believe, I had these notes written down for my own benefit. You have to the 12th of December to certify votes. Each state has to the 12th of December. So from November the 3rd till December the 12th, you have states certify the election results. From the 4th to the 23rd, the states are still receiving in all those ballots Tryphena talked about. You have to the 23rd around Thanksgiving time frame to receive those mail-in votes, to count them. And then on the 14th of December, the Electoral College votes. And that's important. I'm gonna watch it in the state of Maryland. On the 6th, Congress with the vice president certifies the vote. And then on the 20th of January, they are sworn in. there have been questions I've had as in both my positions on, you know, is it possible for us not to have a president on January 20th? No, it's not. We have several amendments in the Constitution that are activated, so to speak, should something happen in our election. The 25th Amendment, you got the 12th Amendment, the 20th, depending on what happens. But somebody's going to be president, whether they're temporary or not, on the 20th of January. But I hope I was able to answer that question. There is a possibility also, if you have a contested election, that we won't know the results. But given those dates that I just gave you, we need to sit tight and be patient in this one.
Well, thank you for that. Gave us a mini civics lesson. I think Ms. Ellis-Johnson also had her hand up.
Well, I just wanted to say the election will not be determined pretty much the night of. It takes days for the election to be determined. I don't want to give any definite days or like my sister Thea did, but it takes days. And believe it or not, we are canvassing ballots now. And we're still receiving ballots from the primary election. I'm serious. We're still receiving ballots from the primary election. I'm not for sure if the constituent was confused and thinking that was the general election ballot, but we don't think so because there's quite a big difference in the ballots. But we're still receiving ballots from the primary election, excuse me. And of course, they're rejected. But if you want your vote to count, get your ballot in on time. I can't stress that enough. If you want your vote to count, please get your ballot in on time. The time is November 3rd, and that's the deadline. If you're overseas, then there's a different deadline. But just get your ballot in on time. Get it postmarked on time. Take it to one of the drop boxes on time. We have until 8 p.m. on November 3rd to get your ballot in. Whether you do it in person, if it's stamped by November 3rd, that's good. But we do want to have your ballot counted, all of them. All the ones I have out, 96,000 of them. We want to count all of them.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And just another note, I do know that on election night, you know, something happens, you get off work kind of late. If you're in line by 8 o'clock, you can still vote, correct?
Yes, as long as you're in line by 8 o'clock, you are still welcome to count, to have your ballot, to cast your ballot, excuse me. Yes.
Fantastic.
Get in line.
Would anyone else
Pack your patience.
Yeah. Would anyone else like to respond? Well, thank you for those responses. I think we touched on this a little earlier, but I think, like I said, it's never hurts to reiterate. What safety precautions are in place to protect voters during early voting and on election day in light of COVID-19?
May I ask safety precautions as in the mask protection or social distancing? Is that the safety precautions you're referring to?
All that.
Yes, we will have plenty of masks available at all voting locations. We have, I believe, 31 voting. There will be 31 voting locations open on the day of election, and we have 7 early vote centers open a week for early voting. We will have those centers equipped with facial masks if the constituent do not have one available. We will have plenty of masks on hand.
Fantastic. Mask Up Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
Then our 5th question is, if you missed the October 13th deadline to register to vote, are you still able to register and vote on November 3rd? What other options do you have if you missed the October 13th deadline? What information is required? Can you provide more instructions and or information to residents that are interested in same-day voter registration?
Yes, I believe that was mentioned earlier. If you missed the deadline to vote on the October 13th deadline, you can vote in person. You may go to a vote center, vote in person. You just need to bring the proper ID that is required on the list that I presented earlier. And you can vote in person on the day of election, as long as you have the required Maryland state issued IDs, driver's license, state ID card, um, I believe a utility bill, things that I mentioned earlier. Let me see if I can find some of those items I have listed. Okay. Some of those items that I have listed earlier were a Maryland license, ID card, change of address card, a paycheck, a bank statement, and a utility bill. You may bring one of those forms of IDs with you, and you may be able to vote on the day of the election if you missed the deadline.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis-Johnson, for that. Would anyone else like to respond to the question? Great. We have a few more questions here from the Facebook. What should you do, or who should you contact if you experience any form of voter intimidation? If anyone would like to respond, just raise your hand or just unmute.
I think we put those contacts in the chat. 1-866 Our Vote is a voter protection hotline that's been set up by attorneys who will help walk you through any issues that you're having, as well as in the state of Maryland, if you are a Democrat. The number is 833-MD-VOTES. That has been set up for you should you have any issues.
May I also add one more thing earlier, Drake, to what I said earlier? I want to also emphasize, if a voter comes into a vote center on the day of election and they want to vote, and they do not have the items that I mentioned earlier, they will be issued a provisional ballot. Just want to bring out all the aspects of voting.
Well, I think that's a perfect segue to our next question. How secure is the provisional ballot?
It's good. It's very secure. That process you will discuss with the election judge, and they will assist you through the provisional ballot process, but it's good. It's safe.
Great. Here's another question from Facebook. Can those who are incarcerated vote? What steps can family members share with them? And then another question is, they're basically the same topic. How are we engaging those recently released from incarceration to vote? Can they vote in Maryland? So voter incarceration, if anybody would like to tackle that.
Well, I don't want to answer all the questions, but yes, if you have been incarcerated in the state of Maryland, you are eligible to vote. I don't remember the when the law was passed, but a few years ago, a law was passed stating that if you have been convicted of a felon and you have met all of your qualifications that have been set for you by the state, you are eligible to vote.
Fantastic.
And you have served your time, met all the qualifications to vote. You are eligible to vote. I can't say it enough. You can vote. Do not let that stop you. Please cast your vote. Your vote is your voice.
I do want to clarify, you cannot be incarcerated. You have to be out and have served your time.
Correct.
And there also is one felony that will keep you from being able to vote, and that is if you've ever sold votes. That is the only time you will not be able to ever vote again.
That is so true. I presented that the first time we did our presentation. Didn't have it on this slide. However, if you have been convicted of selling votes, you are ineligible to vote. That is a felon in the state of Maryland.
Oh, well, thank you for that wonderful information.
So Drake, can I add something? I'm looking in the vote411.org guide, and it's speaking to incarcerated and parole voters, but it says incarcerated eligible voters are advised to register to vote using their permanent address and to request that a mail-in ballot be sent to the correctional facility. So that says if you're incarcerated.
Oh, I can.
And you're not a felon, that you still have that opportunity to vote. Mr. Cooper, you want to?
Isn't that?
Yep. So I, after law school, University of Maryland, Baltimore, I clerked in the circuit court in Baltimore City and asked this question. And so if you are in jail but have not been convicted yet, that's one example where you are innocent until proven guilty. And so even though you are in jail, if you're not been convicted and sentenced, your right to vote has not been taken away yet. And also, even if you are convicted of, I believe, a misdemeanor, let me make sure I'm sure, a misdemeanor, which means less than 1 year in sentence, you also can vote. And so you're right, it's always nuanced there, but it's not 100% bar if you're in jail. It just means that if you haven't been convicted of a prison sentence longer than 1 year, then you cannot vote. Less than 1 year or have not been convicted yet, then you still do have your right to vote. I think I saw some nonprofit was going to prisons recently, registering folks to vote who are eligible. So I do know that there are people in jail who have access to vote for that.
Awesome. Great.
And
Great.
also, may I add, Drake, that if you are on house arrest, you may vote absentee ballot.
Wow. A lot of information that you know with the prison system and voting. Very interesting. We appreciate all the responses. President also.
I was going to say there's about 6,000, look at the website now, about 6,000 Marylanders awaiting trial each month. So that's 6,000 who may be in jail, but who still have the right to vote. So we gotta make sure they're educated on that.
Yes, great. President also.
I know in Anne Arundel County at the detention center, the librarians have registered many of those individuals who are eligible to vote to register to vote in the upcoming elections, and that ballots will be requested and sent to them. The ballots can be delivered to them through their attorneys, and they can also request that ballot.
Wonderful, wonderful. Any other responses? Great, I'm glad we got that, vital information out. The next question is, for our immigrant communities, how are the Democrats and the Republicans engaging with this group who are easily intimidated by voting?
We need to do a better job. This is what I will say. I just will absolutely admit that that is exactly what we need to do. We have worked on the Democratic Central Committee to diversify our at-large seats to include members of the Hispanic community. We are seeking to continue to do that by educating our community on the importance of central committees and helping to broaden and educate all demographic communities in Anne Arundel County. We have looked at committees to address these particular issues, and not just with the immigrant community, but also in different religions, et cetera, because sometimes they feel disenfranchised. Sometimes it's been brought to our attention. So I will say that how are we doing it? We've recognized that it is an opportunity to grow, and that we are looking for ways in which to address it. And if there's anyone watching that has ideas of how the Democratic Central Committee in Anne Arundel County can link arms with our immigrant community to do that, we are open to those conversations. But we have put in place efforts to interpret some of our materials and translate our materials in other languages. We're working on it. That takes money, okay? And in our position, We are a volunteer organization that seeks donations to be able to do those things. So it is an opportunity for growth, sir.
Ms. Stevens?
So I will say that it is an opportunity, and the League of Women Voters in Anne Arundel County has started outreach efforts in the Hispanic communities in Annapolis to begin with. And we created what's called Bill of Rights, Voting Bill of Rights. And it's been translated in Spanish. And we've also had several voter registration efforts in those communities, and we've been requested to come out. The Anne Arundel County Voters Guide is not available in Spanish, but I understand that Montgomery County, that has a huge Hispanic population, their Voters Guide is available both in Spanish and English. And so we're reaching out to those communities that we need to include.
Well, thank you for that. Would anyone else like to respond? Great. I'm glad to hear we're trying to diversify the voting process. Keeping on the topic of immigrants and English not being the first language, we have some first-time voters whose first language is not English. What resources are available to them? Once again, the question is, we have some first-time voters whose first language is not English. What resources are available to them?
Well, I think Brother Cooper said that when in doubt, the State Board of Elections is the place that we need to send anyone who needs assistance, whether it be anyone who has a physical disability or someone who English is not their first language. So I would say that our State Board of Elections, and perhaps Ms. Ellis-Johnson can weigh in on whether or not the local Board of Elections has resources for those members of our community. I do know that the State Board of Elections website is translated in other languages, and that is a resource.
Thank you, Sister Thea. I'm trying to think, do I remember seeing a ballot that was in Spanish? And since I've been on the board, I don't remember seeing a ballot that was in Spanish.
They're in
right?
Spanish.
They're in Spanish?
Yes, they do come. They come in other languages, and you can request it. They do, because we've gotten one in error that was in Spanish.
Okay.
So, yes.
It's just that I don't see them. I don't think I've ever seen one, but they are available then.
Yes, they are available.
And
that's the research.
As Brandon said earlier, it's best to contact the State Board of Elections, the local Board of Elections. They're the greatest resources, online websites to inquire of bilingual ballots. I just don't know why I've never seen one.
Wonderful. Anyone else like to respond? Well, thank you all. Here's another question. I think this is an interesting question. We've often heard, how can we get more people to get out and vote? But this next question is, let me just pull it up here. We've often heard, how can we get people out to vote and encourage them to get out and vote? But this question is asking, how do you think we can inspire and encourage citizens to run for office?
I'll take that question. People always ask me, I always tell them from the beginning, I will never, ever run for office myself. But I love seeing people run for office, particularly, as I mentioned again, I may be biased, but I think the millennial generation is coming of age politically, with political maturity, and it's just exciting for me. I mean, I always look back, I'm a person of history, I love to read, and finding out that, whether it's Thurgood Marshall or Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, they were all making their strides in their 20s. I think Martin Luther King was 27 when he led the Montgomery County bus boycotts. Thurgood Marshall was 28 when he did Brown v. Board of Education. And so I think one thing we need to do is just encourage people of all ages, of course, particularly the millennial generation who are in the 20 to 35, who are now the largest voting bloc right now, to understand that this politics is not just a, Trump and Biden 70-year-old battle of the ages. It's something for all of us. And I think as soon as we get more and more people involved at that age, I think is one thing that I like to do, encourage, regardless of your political affiliation. I think we need more people involved from our across the generation of perspective, so that we have our voice has a say in that nature. I think politics sometimes can become distasteful. I know myself, sometimes I wish it wasn't as nasty as it's been, but I think the best way to make it more accepting and welcoming to a new generation of voters to get younger folks involved to run, but also to vote as well.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. Running for office can be daunting. It's hard work, to be honest, and providing opportunities for making it accessible. One of the things that I am a proponent of is campaign finance reform. Running for a state delegate seat, and it costs you $100,000 to do that, and for a state delegate seat, and they earn $50,000 a year, and you have to raise $200,000 just to run for the seat. That's not attainable for the regular person. I think looking at ways to make running for office attainable for the person qualified to do so. I mean, for president, you only had to be 35 years old, a U.S. citizen for a number of years in the country. Yeah, we've seen how that works. But making it accessible and having mentors who aren't in office till kingdom come, okay? I know this is nonpartisan or anything, but, term limits, looking at things to, not have people in for 40 years in one seat, making it a career opportunity. And those are some of the things that we can look at and advocate for how we want our communities structured and how we want our government structured. To have a president or a senator or a congresswoman or congressman to be in office for as long as some of these people are, we need to look at that. If that's what we want as a community, that's what we want. But I think your question is, how do we get more people to do it? Is to let them understand that they can do it. And it is hard work to do, but it's achievable. And I think leveling the playing field is some of the ways that we need to do that, and in some of the ways that I mentioned.
Well, thank you, Ms. Boykin-Wilson. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time for any more questions. I want to keep this, on time. But I just want to add one thing to what you had to say. At the beginning, I noted I'm the student member of the Board of Education. I'm really the only student. I was at one point the only person under 18 in the county, probably in the county, that held elected office. And you said, just let people know that you can do it. And I think that goes the same for students. So, if you want to really get out there, just go ahead and do it. The world is your oyster. I did it and it turned out well for me as long as you put the hard work. It's going to be hard. It's not going to be easy, but it will pay off. So I think that's wonderful. But before I turn it over to the closing remarks, I just want to close with, some pertinent remarks that Dr. King once gave. He said, "Give us the ballot and we will no longer have to worry the federal government about our basic rights. Give us the ballot and we will fill our legislative halls with men of goodwill. Give us the ballot and we will place judges on the benches of the South who will do justly and love mercy." And I think that's just a wonderful, powerful way for me to close. But now I want to turn it over to Ms. Halsey for the closing remarks.
Thank you, Drake. And I want to thank everyone for joining the collective for our virtual voter education town hall. I want to thank all our panelists, Ms. Thea Boykin-Wilson, the DNC chair, Mr. Brandon Cooper, Republican chair, Mr. Tryphena Ellis-Johnson from the Board of Elections, and Ms. Alfa Stevens from the League of Women Voters. An applause, a special applause to our moderator, Mr. Drake Smith, student member of the Board of Elections. Excellent and outstanding job this evening with me and our moderator. We hope you learned something tonight. Maybe it persuaded you to go out and vote. It doesn't matter who you vote for, but we want you to vote. We want to thank you for viewing and being with us this evening, and have a great night. Thank you.